What's going on, Imperials? Emperor Cubone here. And with over 800 Pokemon, with the new games coming out, there's a lot of variety out there. So much so that everyone has their favorites, everyone has the ones that they remember the most, and then there are some other ones. With so many pocket monsters out there, everyone's bound to have a few that just sort of rub them the wrong way. Not that they hate them, but maybe just forgot about them, or just plain don't understand it at all. And that's what this is. We'll be going through each generation of Pokemon to see which ones are the most problematic for me personally. Be sure to leave your Poke problems in the comments, but this list is 100% fact. I'm kidding, it's just my opinion. We'll be starting with Kanto. So, without further ado, here are the top 5 Kanto Pokemon I have.
Hold on! There's something I've never understood about the Pokemon community here on YouTube. It's always top 5 this and top 10 that, but this is Pokemon. Surely you all know by now that you're allowed to have 6 at a time. I mean, unless you all have eggs on your teams, I have no idea why you would purposefully handicap yourselves like that. Well, all my Pokemon are hatched and ready to go, so here are the top 6 Kanto Pokemon I have a problem with. Number 6, the Oddish and Bellsprout lines. Okay, so we're starting off with a shared spot on the list, but it certainly won't be the last. Now, as I said before, I don't hate these Pokemon. In fact, I've used both a Vileplume and a Victreebel in different playthroughs, and therein lies the problem. You see, while they performed adequately, they never did anything to stand out or set themselves apart. Some of that has to do with their typings, with grass types not faring too well in the Johto games, but a big portion of it comes from their abysmal move pools. Honestly, they're so shallow a Magikarp would suffocate. They just don't seem to learn any powerful moves unless it's from a TM, or hardly get any coverage besides the same standard, same type attacks. Vileplume can learn Drain Punch because it's the only one graced with arms, but that's about it. I had to teach them both the TM for Thief, just so that they would get any sort of coverage. Thief is a terrible move, but it's literally almost all they've got. The only damaging Poison-type move that can be learned by level up between these two is Acid, which is a base 40 power move, learned at level 9 and 23 respectively. This remains true all the way up to Generation 6, by the way. Poison-type was the most populous type in the first generation, beating out even things like Water and Normal, and a lot of that has to do with Pokemon like this, who don't even utilize the secondary typing that they were given without any justification. If they still can't learn any decent Poison-type moves, then what's the point of them even being Poison-type? Honestly, if you need a Grass Poison-type in the first generation, just pick Bulbasaur. He'll be able to do anything these two can way better. Number 5, Magmar. What is this thing? I couldn't tell you. I know it's supposedly based on some folklore about a fire-breathing man-bird thing, but when I look at it, that does not come across at all. It'd probably look a lot cooler if it did resemble the legend more closely. My main problem with Magmar is that he feels like he's just filler. Actually, I feel that way about the entire evolutionary line, but the others won't be appearing in their respective generations, so I'll just let Magmar be the poster child of this unfortunate trio. What I mean by filler is that it seems like they were getting to the end of the Pokédex and suddenly said, "Oh no, we need more fire types!" And then they had a bin of leftover parts from other concept Pokemon and just cobbled it together and called it a night. I mean, look at this thing. It's got a duck bill, it looks like its brain is swelling out of its head, which might be explained by the random shackle around its neck, with ones on its feet to match. There are giant spikes on its back just because, a tail that was ripped off straight from the Charmander line, and of course, don't forget the Elizabethan sleeve ruffles. I can't tell if there's too much thought put into this design or not nearly enough, but when it all comes together, it just comes off as a weird amalgamation of parts that just don't go together in any way whatsoever. Number 4, Farfetchd. It's just a duck, holding a plant. Was this really necessary? I understand the general premise is based on a Japanese proverb about a duck carrying a leek or whatever, but the whole backstory doesn't really come across in translation. And even after we learn about the origin, we still shrug it off because it doesn't relate to us the same. I mean, that'd be like me making a Pokemon based on Paul Bunyan and Babe the Giant Blue Ox. Actually, scratch that. That sounds like a really cool concept for some Pokemon. But even so, I wouldn't expect the rest of the world to get excited about it or appreciate it the same way I would, because it's based on American folklore. Furthermore, they already had a duck Pokemon. You're telling me there was no way to incorporate the proverb into the previously existing design? The idea was just so good that they had to stick a completely different duck in a random spot in the Pokédex? Also, it's mentioned all the time what a delicacy Farfetchd is. This Pokemon was specifically created just so they could say it was endangered because of how delicious it was. Not cool, Game Freak. Number 3. Jinx and Mr. Mime. You might have expected both or either of these Pokemon to be on the list. I've never been a huge fan of Pokemon that looked a lot like humans. This seems to happen mostly in fighting and psychic types. But the Machop line at least has some reptilian features that save it, and that's why I've always liked Hitmonlee better than Hitmonchan, because it looks less human-like and isn't wearing clothes. Mr. Mime and Jinx violate every one of these criteria. These are essentially animals, right? So why do they look so much like people? Are those actually clothes, or just parts of their anatomy? They just bring up too many questions that nobody wanted answers to in the first place. Plus, why is Jinx an ice type? There's nothing about her appearance or lore that would even hint at being ice. It just seems really tacked on. Which does lend credence to the speculation that the ice type was added late into the development of the first generation games, so it was only added to Pokemon with previously established types. That could explain why it feels like it was just added onto Jinx out of nowhere. But Mr. Mime's new fairy type doesn't do anything to make him any less creepy. These entries aren't exactly shattering surprises, but these creepy psychic types are just some of those Pokemon that you dread having to explain to people who may not be fans, and they don't exactly make it any easier on us. Number 2. Dugtrio. Diglett is fine. It's an alright Pokemon. It's pretty cute and has an interesting concept behind it. And then it goes and evolves and you think, oh man, I wonder what it'll be. Probably some hugely awesome, powerful mole that'll finally get out of the ground. Only to watch in confusion as your Diglett invited over 2 of its friends and called it a day. Seriously? That's it? Who in the world thought that would be a good idea? I know all that stuff I said about the proverbs and stuff before, but unless there are some vastly different biological trends happening in moles over in Japan, I can't see how this would make any sense. But what about Magneton? Said the viewer. He was introduced in the same generation. Thank you, viewer. I'm glad you asked. Magneton makes sense. There is science behind his design. Magnets attract. It's what they do. So the fact that some magnets would get stuck together is plausible and honestly kind of funny. What science does not support, as far as I'm aware, is that 3 moles hugging each other constitute a whole new life form. Even Weezing's design is different than just 2 coughing slapped side by side. Other than looking slightly angrier, Dugtrio is literally just 3 Diglett hanging out in the same hole. Hey, I'd be mad too if I had to share my crib with 2 freeloaders. Number 1. Execute. Remember how we just talked about how ridiculous multiple beings making up one creature is? Well, here's an even worse offender than Dugtrio. How can half a dozen individuals make up one entity? I know they're psychic and all, but does that mean that they operate as one mind? If so, why do they seem to have separate personalities? If one of them is separated from the others, are they still one Execute? If a group of them find a different lost one, can they join with it and become whole without any problem? If one of the eggs dies, do they all die? Is an Execute one single egg out of the 6? If you can it only be referred to as such when there are 6 in unison? Would it evolve? If so, what do you call a lone egg by itself? In the Pokédex, would the Executors simply have fewer coconut heads if there were fewer eggs to begin with, or to only the tallest and heaviest how can egg 6 eggs come out of one single egg? The fact that I can rattle off so many ridiculous questions about one single Pokemon is insane. I know the rules weren't quite as concrete back then, but the idea seems a little far out even for them. It's like someone had an idea and then nobody bothered to tell them that it flew in the face of all the science that they had previously established in the universe. Although we have Alolan Executor, it feels almost like they're intentionally downplaying Execute, so as not to put it in the spotlight. Even though Execute is an incredibly troubling Pokemon, I don't think we'll be getting the answers to any of those questions anytime soon. So there we are. my top 6 Kanto Pokemon I have a problem with. Which Pokemon do you find problematic? Did I miss any? Let me know down in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure and share it with a friend. Any support is greatly appreciated. Also, be sure and subscribe so that you can become an Imperial today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you around next time.